The rain fell like tears from a sky that understood grief. Elena Sofia Rodriguez stood at her father's graveside, one hand pressed against her swollen belly where her daughter kicked restlessly, the other clutching the umbrella that did little to shield her from the November downpour. At 8 months pregnant, every breath felt like effort. Every moment standing felt like an eternity, but she refused to sit. Her father had been a man who stood tall his entire life, and she would honor him the same way. Victor Rodriguez's casket gleamed under the funeral tent's covering, mahogany and brass catching the gray light. 58 years old. A heart attack in his office. No warning, no goodbyes. Just a phone call that had shattered Elena's world while she'd been folding tiny onesies in the nursery of the home she shared with Marcus. Shared, past tense. Because Marcus Thorne stood 15 feet away, not beside her, where a husband should be, but near the back of the crowd with Natasha Bennett pressed against his side like she had every right to be there. Elena had noticed them the moment the service began. Noticed how Natasha's hand rested possessively on Marcus's arm. Noticed how neither of them looked appropriately somber for a funeral. Noticed how they'd arrived together in Marcus's BMW, while Elena had ridden alone in the town car James Patterson had insisted on sending for her. If you're hooked already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Now, let's get back to the story. The priest's voice droned through prayers Elena couldn't focus on. Her father was gone. The man who'd built Rodriguez Global from a single trucking route into an $800 million logistics empire. The man who'd taught her to read balance sheets before she learned to read chapter books. The man who'd held her hand through her mother's death when Elena was 12, promising they'd face the world together. Now she faced it alone, 8 months pregnant, grieving and watching her husband stand with another woman at her father's funeral. Marcus caught her staring and had the audacity to meet her eyes without shame. 36 years old. Handsome in the way corporate success made men. Handsome, expensive suit, perfect hair. The confidence of someone who'd climbed the ladder through intelligence and ruthless ambition. He'd been VP of Operations at Rodriguez Global for 8 years, the last 5 of them as Elena's husband. She'd met him when she was 24, fresh from her MBA, and determined to prove she deserved her position as strategic planning director through merit, not nepotism. Marcus had been 31, charming, attentive, impressed by her intelligence rather than threatened by it, or so she'd thought. The pregnancy had changed everything. When Elena had told Marcus about the baby 6 months ago, his face had shuddered in a way she'd never seen before. She'd expected joy, excitement, maybe nerves, but not the cold calculation that had flickered behind his eyes before he'd forced a smile. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," he'd said, the endearment sounding hollow. Just wonderful timing. She'd stepped back from work then, as her pregnancy progressed and complications arose. Preeclampsia, bed rest, her father insisting she focus on staying healthy rather than quarterly reports. Marcus had seemed relieved, even as Elena felt pieces of herself disappearing. The strategic thinker, the executive, the woman who commanded boardrooms reduced to someone who existed solely in relation to the baby she carried. The priest finished his prayers. People began approaching the casket to pay final respects. Elena moved forward slowly, her movements hampered by her belly and the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She needed to say goodbye to her father, needed to tell him one last time that she loved him, that she'd miss him, that she didn't know how to exist in a world where he wasn't a phone call away. Marcus intercepted her halfway there. "Elena, we need to talk." His voice was low, urgent, his hand gripping her elbow with just enough pressure to stop her movement. "Not now, Marcus, please." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Yes, now, before the will reading tomorrow." His blue eyes, once the feature she'd found most attractive, now looked cold and hard. "We both know what's going to happen. Your Uncle Carlos will inherit the company. You'll get some kind of trust fund, probably. And I need you to understand something before that happens." Elena stared at him, confusion cutting through her grief. "Understand what?" "That I can't do this anymore. He released her elbow and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a manila envelope that looked obscene in its official formality. Elena, I'm filing for divorce. The words didn't process immediately. Divorce. The syllables felt foreign, impossible. Behind Marcus, she saw Natasha watching, with barely concealed satisfaction, one hand resting on her own flat stomach, in a gesture that suddenly made horrible sense. You're divorcing me. At my father's funeral. Elena's voice came out hollow, distant, like she was listening to someone else speak. While I'm 8 months pregnant with your daughter. The timing isn't ideal, I know. But I've been trying to find the right moment, and there never is one. And with everything changing tomorrow, Marcus glanced toward the casket, toward Victor Rodriguez's final resting place. I need to be honest with you, with both of us. Elena looked down at the envelope in her hands. Through the rain-spotted plastic window, she could see the words, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage, in bold legal text. How long? She asked quietly. How long have you been planning this? Does it matter? Marcus shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable under the stares of funeral guests who were beginning to notice the scene unfolding. Elena, we both know this marriage hasn't been working. You've changed. The pregnancy. Stepping away from work, you're not the woman I married. I'm pregnant, Marcus. I'm carrying your child. Your daughter. Elena felt her baby kick hard against her ribs, as if responding to her mother's distress. And yes, I stepped away from work because the doctor said I had to. Because my blood pressure was dangerous. Because our daughter's health required it. That's exactly what I mean. Marcus's voice hardened. Everything is about the baby now. About doctor's appointments and nursery furniture and baby names. You've completely lost yourself, Elena. You're not a partner anymore. You're just what? Just a pregnant housewife waiting for daddy's money. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking in its precision. And I didn't marry a housewife. I married Victor Rodriguez's heir. I married someone with power, connections, influence. But that's all changing tomorrow, isn't it? Carlos gets the company. You get a trust fund. And I refuse to be married to someone whose greatest accomplishment is getting fat and producing a baby. The slap came from somewhere deep inside Elena, her hand connecting with Marcus's face, before her conscious mind registered the decision to hit him. The sound echoed across the cemetery, causing heads to turn, conversations to stop, the entire funeral to freeze in stunned silence. Marcus touched his reddening cheek, his eyes blazing with fury. You just assaulted me in front of witnesses, Elena. That's going into my filing. Get away from me. Elena's voice shook, but her spine straightened despite the weight of her belly, despite the grief crushing her chest, despite everything. Get away from my father's funeral. You're not welcome here. I'm VP of Operations at Rodriguez Global. I have every right to pay my respects to the company's founder. Marcus straightened his tie with deliberate precision. And I'll be attending the will reading tomorrow, as a senior executive. But as of this moment, Elena, you and I are done. Sign the papers. My attorney will be in touch about custody arrangements. He walked away, Natasha immediately moving to his side, her hand sliding around his waist with triumphant possession. Elena watched them go, the envelope still clutched in her trembling hands, feeling the stares of 100 people burning into her back. James Patterson materialized beside her like a protective spirit. At 52, the family attorney had been her father's closest confidant for 20 years. A silver-haired man whose gentle demeanor concealed one of the sharpest legal minds in California. He'd been standing near the back during the service, and now he placed a steadying hand on Elena's shoulder. Mrs. Thorne, come. Let's get you out of this rain. I need to. Elena gestured toward her father's casket, toward the goodbye she still needed to say. I'll bring you back when the crowd clears. Right now, you need to sit down before you collapse. James's voice was firm but kind, the same tone he'd used when Elena was 12 and grieving her mother. Please, your father would want me to take care of you. He guided her to the black Lincoln town car, helped her into the back seat despite her bulk, and closed the door against the rain and the staring crowd. Inside the car's quiet sanctuary, Elena finally let the tears come great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body and made her daughter kick frantically as if trying to comfort her mother from the inside. He served me with divorce papers, she gasped between sobs, at my father's funeral, in front of everyone. James settled into the seat beside her, his weathered face creased with concern and something else, something that looked like carefully controlled fury. I know, I saw. He thinks Uncle Carlos is inheriting the company. He said, Elena choked on the words, he said I'm just a pregnant housewife now. That I'm not worth staying married to without my father's power behind me. Elena, James took both her hands in his grip warm and steady. Look at me. She raised her tear-stained face, meeting his serious gray eyes. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this car. Not yet, not until tomorrow's will reading. Do you understand? Elena nodded slowly, confused by the intensity in his voice. Your father updated his will 2 months ago. The week after your doctor confirmed your pregnancy complications. James pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. He called me to his office at midnight. Elena said he'd been thinking about legacy, about what kind of world his grandchild would be born into, about who could be trusted with everything he'd built. Uncle Carlos is not named in the will except for a $10 million bequest. James's smile was thin and sharp. Elena, your father left everything else to you. Rodriguez, Global, all subsidiaries, all real estate holdings, all liquid assets. 100% control. You don't inherit a trust fund, my dear. You inherit an empire. The words didn't process immediately. Elena stared at James, her mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. But I stepped away from the company. I haven't been involved in operations for months. Your father said that was temporary. That you were protecting his granddaughter. That when the time was right, you'd return stronger than ever. James carefully unfolded the document, showing her the key provisions. There's more. The will includes provisions specifically addressing your marriage to Marcus Thorne. Elena's heart began to pound. What kind of provisions? Your father suspected Marcus married you for access to the company. He'd noticed certain irregularities in Marcus's expense reports, his handling of vendor contracts, his private meetings with competitors. James's voice hardened. So he hired investigators. Elena, Marcus has been embezzling from Rodriguez Global for 3 years. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but totaling approximately $4 million. The car interior seemed to tilt. Elena gripped the seat, her breath coming in short gasps. Victor documented everything. Every fraudulent expense report, every kickback, every shell company Marcus used to funnel money away from Rodriguez Global. James closed the document. He was planning to confront Marcus after your baby was born, after you were strong enough to handle the revelation. But then he died. And Marcus saw an opportunity. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. He thought with my father gone, Uncle Carlos would inherit. That I'd be pushed aside, out of power. That he could divorce me without consequences and move on with Natasha. Exactly. James's expression was grim satisfaction. But tomorrow at the will reading, Marcus Thorne is going to discover that he didn't divorce Victor Rodriguez's powerless daughter. He divorced Victor Rodriguez's sole heir and the woman who now owns the company where he's VP of operations. Elena looked down at the divorce papers in her lap, at the legal language that Marcus thought would free him from what he saw as a burden. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks beneath her palm. This baby, this precious life, was the catalyst for everything: her father's decision to leave her the empire, Marcus's decision to abandon her. The moment when everything changed. What do I do? She asked quietly. Tonight, nothing. Go home, rest, take care of yourself and the baby. James's smile grew wider. Tomorrow, we attend the will reading at 10 a.m. The entire board of directors will be present. All senior executives including Marcus, your Uncle Carlos, and selected family members. And when I read the provisions of your father's will, when everyone discovers who really inherits Rodriguez Global, Marcus will realize what he's done. Marcus will realize he's just handed you every advantage. He's served you with divorce papers, establishing a clear timeline of his abandonment. He's done so while you're 8 months pregnant, which California courts view very unfavorably. And most importantly, James leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He's done so 24 hours before discovering that you're now his boss. Not his equal, not his partner, his boss. The woman who owns 100% of the company that employs him. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Something cold and hard and strong, crystallizing out of grief and betrayal, and the fierce protective love she felt for her unborn daughter. He called me fat, she said softly. He said my greatest accomplishment was producing a baby. He said I wasn't worth staying married to, without my father's power. Then tomorrow, James replied, we'll show Marcus Thorne exactly how much power you have. And exactly what happens when someone underestimates a Rodriguez woman. Through the car window, Elena could see people leaving the funeral, heading to their cars, their umbrellas dotting the cemetery like dark flowers. She saw Marcus and Natasha walking together, saw them laughing about something, saw the way Natasha's hand rested on her own stomach in that possessive gesture. Elena thought about her father, about the empire he'd built through intelligence and determination and refusal to accept limitations. She thought about her mother, who died too young but had taught Elena that grace and steel weren't opposites, they were partners. And she thought about her daughter, who would be born into a world where her mother was either a victim or a victor. James, Elena said, her voice steady now, clear and strong despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. I want to see the full will. I want to see every document about Marcus's embezzlement. And I want to understand exactly what weapons my father left me. That's my girl. James pulled out his phone. I'll have everything delivered to your house tonight. But Elena, you need to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll take care of yourself and that baby first. Revenge is satisfying, but your daughter's health comes before everything else. Elena nodded, her hand protective over her belly. I promise. 24 hours, James. Then Marcus Thorne learns what it costs to underestimate me. As the town car pulled away from the cemetery, Elena looked back one last time at her father's grave. The rain had finally stopped, and a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the flowers piled around his casket. She'd wanted to say goodbye. But now, looking at that light, she realized her father had already said everything that mattered. He'd given her the tools to fight back, the power to protect her daughter, and the means to show Marcus that divorcing her was the biggest mistake of his life. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover that the pregnant housewife he discarded at a funeral was actually the woman who now controlled his entire future. And Elena Sofia Rodriguez, CEO of Rodriguez Global and sole heir to an $800 million empire, would finally show the world exactly who she'd always been underneath. Elena's house felt foreign when James's driver dropped her off at sunset. The modern glass and steel structure that Marcus had insisted they buy in Calabasas too big, too cold, too much a statement of wealth rather than a home seemed to mock her with its empty spaces. She stood in the foyer, dripping rain onto Italian marble, and realized that in less than 24 hours, this house would be just another asset to divide. Except Marcus didn't know what assets she actually controlled now. The documents James had promised arrived within the hour, delivered by courier in 3 leather portfolios that looked more like weapons than files. Elena spread them across the dining room table, the one they'd purchased for entertaining clients and executives that had never felt like a place for family dinners, and began to read. The will was straightforward in its devastation. Victor Rodriguez, being of sound mind and body, left his daughter Elena Sofia Rodriguez Thorne the following. Rodriguez Global Logistics and all subsidiary companies estimated value $800 million. The family estate in Montecito estimated value $45 million. All liquid assets, investment portfolios, and real estate holdings estimated value $127 million. 100% voting control over all corporate decisions. Position of CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately upon his death. Total inheritance. Approximately $972 million, with full operational control of one of America's largest privately held logistics empires. Carlos Rodriguez, Victor's younger brother, received $10 million and a position on the advisory board with no voting rights. Other family members received generous bequests, ranging from $500,000 to $2 million each. But the empire, the real power, went to Elena alone. Her father's letter, tucked into the back of the will, made his reasoning clear. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't stay to see my granddaughter born. But I leave you something more valuable than my presence. I leave you power. You stepped away from Rodriguez Global to protect your baby. Marcus saw that as weakness. I saw it as the strength to prioritize what truly matters. But make no mistake, my brilliant girl, you are ready to lead this company. You've always been ready. I've watched Marcus Thorne for 5 years, and I know what he is. He married my daughter to position himself for this inheritance. He assumed I'd leave control to him through you, or that I'd pass everything to Carlos, and Marcus could manipulate his way into power. He was wrong on both counts. The evidence of his embezzlement is in Portfolio 2. Use it wisely. Protect yourself and my granddaughter. And show the world what I've always known, that Elena Rodriguez doesn't need anyone's name or power to succeed. You've earned this empire through your intelligence, your strategic mind, and your character. Build something extraordinary for my granddaughter. And never, ever let anyone make you feel small again. I love you always, Dad. Elena read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words. Then she moved to Portfolio 2. The evidence of Marcus's theft was meticulous. Her father had hired forensic accountants who'd traced every irregularity. Shell companies in Delaware. Vendor contracts with inflated rates where Marcus received kickbacks. Expense reports claiming business meetings that never happened. Private jet usage for personal trips, with Natasha logged as corporate travel. $4 million over 3 years. Not enough to crater Rodriguez Global's bottom line, but enough to constitute felony grand theft. Enough to destroy Marcus's career, and possibly land him in prison. There was more. Photographs of Marcus and Natasha together, dating back 18 months, long before Elena's pregnancy, long before she'd stepped away from work. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, weekend getaways to Cabo and Napa, all charged to company accounts as business development expenses. The affair hadn't started during her pregnancy like Marcus claimed. It had started while Elena was still fully engaged at Rodriguez Global, still the strategic planning director. Still everything Marcus claimed to have married. He'd been cheating on her while she was at her most powerful, which meant his betrayal had nothing to do with her stepping away from work. It had everything to do with who he'd always been, a man who saw relationships as transactions and loyalty as weakness. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number made her blood run cold. Heard you got served today. That's what happens when you get fat and boring. Enjoy single motherhood and whatever scraps Carlos throws you. N. Natasha, gloating. Stupid enough to text from her own phone, to create written evidence of her cruelty, to document the timeline of her relationship with Marcus. Elena screenshot the message and forwarded it to James with a simple note: add this to the file. His response came immediately. Perfect. California is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery impacts custody and asset division. She just handed us ammunition. Another text followed. How are you feeling? Any contractions or signs of early labor? The stress? I'm fine. Elena typed back. The baby's fine. We're both stronger than Marcus thinks. She spent the next 3 hours reading through every document, making notes, understanding the full scope of what her father had built and what she was about to inherit. Rodriguez Global wasn't just a logistics company, it was a network of shipping lanes, warehousing facilities, and transportation contracts that moved goods across 3 continents. 42,000 employees. Operations in 17 countries. Government contracts worth hundreds of millions. And tomorrow, it would all be hers. At midnight, Elena finally allowed herself to rest. She lay in the bed she'd shared with Marcus for 5 years, though he'd spent the last 2 months in the guest room. Claiming her pregnancy made her restless movements disruptive to his sleep, and felt her daughter moving inside her. Your grandfather loved you before he ever met you, she whispered to her belly. He built this empire for you. And I promise you, sweetheart, your father's betrayal won't touch you. You're going to grow up knowing you're worth more than any man's validation. You're going to grow up watching your mother build something extraordinary. The baby kicked hard, as if in agreement. Elena didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face as he handed her those divorce papers. Saw Natasha's triumphant smile. Heard his voice saying she was just a pregnant housewife, that her greatest accomplishment was getting fat. Tomorrow, she'd show him exactly how wrong he was. Across town, in Natasha Bennett's Century City penthouse, Marcus Thorne popped a bottle of Dom Perignon he'd expensed to Rodriguez Global 6 months ago. To freedom, Natasha purred, accepting a glass and curling against him on her white leather sofa. And to timing. God, Marcus, I can't believe you actually did it at the funeral. That was brilliant. It was necessary. Marcus took a long drink, feeling the tension of the day finally easing from his shoulders. Elena's going to be emotional and vulnerable for weeks. The pregnancy, losing her father, the divorce she'll sign, whatever settlement I propose, just to make the pain stop. And Carlos will take over the company. Natasha traced a finger down Marcus's chest, her dark eyes gleaming with calculation. You're sure he'll keep you as VP? Carlos and I have an understanding. He knows I've been essentially running operations while Victor focused on strategy and Elena played house. Marcus refilled his glass. When he takes control tomorrow, I'll be positioned as his right hand. Give it 6 months, I'll be COO. Another year, and Carlos will be ready to step back and let me run the show. Natasha smiled, but something flickered behind her eyes. And what about Elena? She was strategic planning director before the pregnancy. Won't she want to come back? Come back to what? Carlos isn't going to give her a senior position out of pity. Marcus's laugh was harsh. She stepped away when her father needed her most. That's how the board will see it. They'll see a daughter who chose pregnancy over duty, who abandoned the company during a critical time. Carlos will offer her some token consultant role, maybe a seat on an advisory board with no real power. But CEO, director level? Never happening. She slapped you in front of everyone. Natasha's voice dropped lower, more intimate. Aren't you worried she'll fight back? Make things difficult. Marcus set down his glass and pulled Natasha onto his lap, his hands possessive on her waist. Elena doesn't know how to fight. She spent her whole life being daddy's good girl, following the rules, trying to prove she deserves respect rather than taking it. She'll cry, she'll feel betrayed, but she'll sign the divorce papers and accept whatever settlement I offer because that's who she is. Passive. Accommodating. Weak. Not weak enough to stop herself from hitting you. That was emotion, not strength. There's a difference. Marcus kissed Natasha's neck, already planning his next moves. The slap actually helps me. Shows she's unstable, volatile, possibly dangerous. When we file custody paperwork, I'll make sure the judge knows she committed assault in public while heavily pregnant. Doesn't look good for someone claiming to be a fit mother. Natasha leaned back to look at him, her expression serious. You really think you'll get custody? Joint at minimum. But realistically, Elena's about to be a single mother with no job and limited resources. I'm a successful executive with a stable income, and he gestured around Natasha's penthouse. A stable relationship. Courts favor two-parent households, especially when one parent has proven she can't control her temper. What about the baby's last name? It'll be Thorne. I insisted on that when Elena got pregnant. Marcus's smile was sharp with satisfaction. She wanted Rodriguez as a middle name, but I talked her into Catherine after her mother. The baby will be Sophia Catherine Thorne, and she'll carry my name even if Elena tries to turn her against me. Natasha was quiet for a moment, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against Marcus's shoulder. And us? When do we go public? Give it 3 months. Let the divorce process. Wait for the baby to be born. Let Elena settle into whatever pathetic routine she builds for herself. Marcus stood, carrying Natasha with him toward the bedroom. Then, we'll make our announcement. Maybe at the company holiday party. New year, new relationship, new era at Rodriguez Global. I like that. Natasha wrapped her legs around his waist. VP's girlfriend has a nice ring to it. VP's wife sounds even better. One divorce at a time. Sweetheart. But Marcus was already imagining it, Natasha at company events on his arm, beautiful and ambitious, and nothing like the dowdy pregnant woman he was leaving behind. Natasha understood power, understood networking, understood that relationships were strategic moves in a larger game. Elena had never understood that. She'd actually believed in love, in partnership, in building a life together. She'd been so naive, so trusting, so easy to manipulate. Marcus had targeted her 5 years ago because of who her father was, because of the access and opportunities that marriage to Victor Rodriguez's daughter would provide. The fact that Elena was intelligent and attractive had been a bonus, but ultimately irrelevant. He'd married a strategic asset. He was divorcing a liability. And tomorrow, when Carlos took control of Rodriguez Global, Marcus would be perfectly positioned to continue his rise to the top. What he would build with Natasha would be different. She understood the game. She knew every smile was calculated, every touch was a transaction, every moment of intimacy was really about power and position. It was honest in its dishonesty, refreshing in its clarity. Tell me about the will reading tomorrow, Natasha murmured against his ear. What happens? 10 a.m. Conference room at Rodriguez Global Headquarters. James Patterson reads the will. Carlos accepts his inheritance. Board members pledge their loyalty to the new regime. Marcus shrugged. Standard corporate succession. Boring, really, except for watching Elena realize she's lost everything. Will she be there? Probably. Pregnant and weepy and devastated. Should be entertaining. Natasha laughed, the sound sharp and bright. God, I almost feel sorry for her. Losing her father. Losing her husband. Losing her position in 1 week. That's brutal, even by my standards. She'll survive. Elena's nothing if not resilient in that pathetic, long-suffering way. Marcus pulled Natasha closer. But she'll never be what she was. She'll never have the power or influence she once had. And she'll spend the rest of her life knowing that I chose you over her. They celebrated until dawn, drinking expensive champagne that Rodriguez Global had purchased, in a penthouse whose rent Natasha paid with a salary she earned at Rodriguez Global, planning a future they assumed was inevitable. Neither of them considered that Victor Rodriguez might have left the company to anyone except Carlos. Neither of them imagined that Elena might have weapons they didn't know about. Neither of them understood that underestimating a pregnant woman was the oldest, most fatal mistake men like Marcus had been making for centuries. Tomorrow would teach them. Tomorrow would change everything. Elena woke at 6 a.m. after 3 hours of restless sleep. Her daughter had been active all night, kicking and shifting as if she sensed her mother's tension. Elena lay in bed for a moment, one hand on her belly, feeling each movement and letting it ground her. Big day today, sweetheart, she whispered, the day your mother stops being invisible. She showered carefully, her movements slow and deliberate. 8 months pregnant meant everything took longer, required more planning, demanded patience. Elena didn't naturally possess, but this morning, she used the time to center herself, to remember who she was underneath the grief and betrayal. Elena Rodriguez. Master's degree from Stanford. 3 years as strategic planning director at one of America's fastest growing companies. Architect of the expansion strategy that had doubled Rodriguez Global's revenue in 2 years. Daughter of Victor Rodriguez and heir to his empire. Not Marcus Thorne's discarded wife. Not just a pregnant housewife. Not the weak, passive woman Marcus assumed she was. She dressed in a black Armani maternity suit that her father had bought her 6 months ago, insisting she'd need it for board meetings after the baby came. Power dressing doesn't stop because you're pregnant, he'd said. If anything, it matters more. Make them see your strength, not your condition. The suit fit perfectly, accentuating her pregnancy rather than hiding it. She left her hair down dark waves that fell past her shoulders, feminine but professional. Minimal makeup except for the lipstick her mother used to wear, a deep red that signaled confidence and control. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw her father's daughter. She saw a woman who could walk into that conference room and claim what was rightfully hers. James called, At 8:30. How are you feeling? Strong. Elena surprised herself with how true it was. Ready. The board has been arriving since 8. Marcus showed up 20 minutes ago with Natasha. He looks very pleased with himself. He thinks Carlos is inheriting. The entire company thinks Carlos is inheriting. I've let that assumption stand because the shock will be more effective. James paused. Elena, when I read the provisions naming you as sole heir and CEO, there's going to be chaos. Arguments, accusations, possibly threats. Marcus will almost certainly demand the will be contested. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for anything. Good, because the moment I finish reading, your new life begins. No more hiding behind your pregnancy or your grief. No more letting Marcus or anyone else define you. You walk out of that conference room as the CEO and owner of Rodriguez Global, and from that moment forward, everyone will be watching to see if you can handle it. Elena felt her daughter kick hard against her ribs, as if cheering her mother on. I can handle it, James. I've been training for this my entire life. I just forgot for a while. Your father knew you'd remember when it mattered. She could hear the smile in James's voice. I'll see you at 9:45. Park in the executive garage. Your father's spot is now yours. Security has your credentials updated. After hanging up, Elena stood in her closet and looked at the divorce papers Marcus had served her yesterday. She'd left them on the dresser, unable to bring herself to read through the details last night. Now she picked them up and flipped through the pages. Marcus was demanding joint custody with primary physical placement, which meant he wanted Sofia living with him and Natasha most of the time. He was requesting Elena pay child support based on his assumed higher earning capacity. He wanted the house, both cars, and a division of assets that assumed Elena would receive some inheritance, but nothing substantial. The entire filing was predicated on Marcus being the more financially stable parent, the one with the career and income and resources to provide for their daughter. By noon today, every assumption in these papers would be destroyed. Elena took a photo of each page and sent them to James with a message. Review for leverage. I want everything legally possible. His response. Consider it done. See you in 1 hour. Time to show them what a Rodriguez woman can do. Elena grabbed her leather portfolio, the one her father had given her when she made director, engraved with her initials, and headed to her car. The Tesla was in Marcus's name, something he'd insisted on for tax purposes. She'd let him have it. She'd let him have the house, too. What were cars and houses compared to an $800 million empire? The drive to Rodriguez Global headquarters in downtown Los Angeles took 40 minutes. Elena had made this drive hundreds of times, but today it felt different. Today she wasn't going to work, she was going to claim her birthright. She pulled into the executive garage, parking in the spot that had said V. Rodriguez CEO for 30 years. Security had already updated the sign to read E. Rodriguez CEO, and seeing her name there made something fierce and proud bloom in Elena's chest. The elevator required her credentials also updated overnight and carried her directly to the executive floor. She exited into the familiar hallway, lined with photographs of Rodriguez Global's history. Her great-grandfather, with the company's first truck. Her grandfather opening the first warehouse. Her father shaking hands with presidents and premiers and captains of industry. Soon, there would be photos of her. Elena Rodriguez, the fifth generation to lead this empire. The first woman CEO in company history. The mother who'd refused to let betrayal destroy her family's legacy. The conference room doors were closed. Elena could hear voices inside, low murmurs of conversation, probably speculation about what Victor's will contained. She checked her watch. 9:52 a.m. 8 minutes until her new life began. 8 minutes until Marcus Thorne learned the most expensive lesson of his life. Elena took a deep breath, placed one hand on her belly where her daughter rested, and pushed open the doors. Every head turned. Marcus sat at the far end of the table next to Natasha, his face flickering with surprise that Elena had actually shown up. Carlos occupied what had been Victor's seat already, assuming power, already comfortable with authority that wasn't his yet. The board members filled the other chairs, all men over 50, who'd worked with her father for decades. They all stared at her belly first, at her pregnancy, at the visible evidence of her condition. She watched them dismiss her in real time, just the grieving daughter, just the pregnant wife, just a woman who happened to be in the room while important business was conducted. Let them think that for 8 more minutes. Let them all believe she was powerless and invisible. Because in 8 minutes, Elena Rodriguez was going to remind every person in this room exactly who she'd always been. And they would never underestimate her again. James Patterson stood at the head of the conference room table. A leather portfolio open before him, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked every inch, the distinguished family attorney's silver hair, immaculately groomed, charcoal suit pressed to perfection. The bearing of someone who'd witnessed and orchestrated more corporate transfers of power than most people could imagine. "Thank you all for coming," James began, his voice carrying the weight of formality. "We're here to read and execute the last will and testament of Victor Manuel Rodriguez, dated September 15th of this year, 8 weeks before his death." Elena settled carefully into a chair near the door, the only empty seat available. She'd chosen it deliberately close enough to observe everyone's reactions, far enough from the table's power center that no one would see her as a threat. Marcus didn't even glance her way. His attention was fixed on Carlos, already calculating alliances and strategies for the new regime. Natasha, sitting beside Marcus, in a chair that should have been reserved for senior executives, was less subtle. She stared at Elena with undisguised satisfaction, her hand resting on her own flat stomach in that possessive gesture Elena had noticed at the funeral. The message was clear. "I won. I'm carrying Marcus's future. You're yesterday's news." Elena met her eyes and smiled slightly. Just smiled. Let Natasha wonder what that meant. "Before I begin," James continued, "I want to note for the record that this will was executed in accordance with all California statutes, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and reviewed by 2 additional attorneys to ensure its validity. Mr. Rodriguez was of completely sound mind when he made these decisions." "Of course he was," Carlos interjected, his voice booming with false heartiness. "My brother was sharp until the very end. God rest his soul." He glanced around the table at the board members. "I know Victor trusted all of you to help guide Rodriguez Global through this transition. I hope you'll extend that same trust to me as we move forward together." Several board members nodded. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his body language screaming confidence. He'd already positioned himself at Carlos's right hand, literally and figuratively. James adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Victor Manuel Rodriguez, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The standard legal preamble washed over the room. Elena watched faces as James read through preliminary provisions, funeral arrangements already executed, charitable donations to be dispersed, minor bequests to longtime employees and household staff. "To my brother Carlos Rodriguez, I leave the sum of $10 million, to be paid in full within 90 days of my death, and a seat on the advisory board of Rodriguez Global with a 5-year term." Carlos's smile froze. 10 million was generous by any standard, but advisory board wasn't CEO. It wasn't controlling interest. It wasn't anything close to the inheritance he'd expected. "What about the company?" Carlos asked, his voice tight. "The controlling shares, the operations, the—" "Please let me finish," James interrupted smoothly. "To my nieces Maria and Isabella Rodriguez, I leave $1 million each. To my nephew Stephen Rodriguez, I leave $1 million. To my late wife's sister, Patricia Morrison, I leave $2 million and the property in Santa Barbara that she always admired." James continued through a list of bequests, each one generous, but none of them touching the real power, the company itself, the voting shares, the operational control that represented Victor Rodriguez's life's work. Marcus shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering. If Carlos wasn't inheriting operational control, then who was? "The remainder of my estate," James read, his voice steady and clear, "including all shares, assets, properties, and interests in Rodriguez Global Logistics and its subsidiary companies, I leave entirely to my daughter, Elena Sofia Rodriguez Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched Marcus's face drain of color, watched Carlos half rise from his chair, watched the board members exchange shocked glances, watched Natasha's mouth fall open in disbelief. Furthermore, James continued, as if he hadn't just detonated a nuclear bomb in the conference room. I hereby appoint my daughter Elena as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Rodriguez Global, effective immediately upon my death, with complete operational authority and 100% voting control. That's impossible, Marcus said, his voice strangled. Elena stepped away from the company. She hasn't been involved in operations for 6 months. She can't just... The will is valid and legally binding, James interrupted. Mr. Rodriguez updated it 8 weeks ago with full knowledge of Elena's pregnancy and temporary leave from operations. In fact, he specifically addressed that concern. James pulled out another page. I'll read his explanatory letter now. Elena felt tears threaten, but held them back. She needed to be strong for this moment, needed to show everyone in this room that she could handle what her father had entrusted to her. James cleared his throat and began. To my daughter Elena, you stepped away from Rodriguez Global to protect my granddaughter. Some will view this as weakness or abandonment of duty. They are fools. You made the decision a true leader makes. You prioritized what mattered most and trusted others to handle what could be delegated. Marcus stood abruptly. This is insane. Victor was clearly not thinking straight. Elena is 8 months pregnant, emotional, grieving she can't possibly run a billion-dollar company in her condition. Sit down, Mr. Thorne, James said coldly. I'm not finished reading. I don't need to hear any more. This will is obviously invalid. Victor was under duress, or Elena influenced him somehow. Convinced him to. Are you accusing me of manipulating my dying father? Elena spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through Marcus's tirade like a blade through silk. Every eye in the room turned to her. Because I'd be very careful about making accusations you can't prove, Marcus, especially now. Especially now that you need my goodwill for the divorce? Marcus's laugh was harsh. Please, Elena. Everyone in this room knows you're not qualified to run Rodriguez Global. You were a decent strategic planner. I'll give you that. But CEO? You don't have the experience, the connections, or frankly, the temperament. The temperament, Elena repeated softly. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning you're too emotional. Too soft. Too focused on making everyone happy, instead of making hard decisions. Marcus gestured to her belly. And right now, you're hormonal and heavily pregnant and grieving your father. Those aren't the qualities of someone who should control an $800 million empire. Elena stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked toward the head of the table, toward her father's chair where Carlos still sat, and the room seemed to hold its breath. James, she said quietly, would you please finish reading my father's letter? James nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. Your husband Marcus Thorne married you because he believed he could control you and through you gain control of Rodriguez Global. He was wrong on both counts. I've spent the past 2 years documenting his embezzlement, his fraud, his systematic theft from this company. The evidence is in Portfolio 2, delivered to you with this will. Use it to protect yourself and my granddaughter. The room erupted. Board members shouting questions. Carlos, demanding to see evidence. Marcus's face cycling through shock, denial, and rage. That's a lie. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. Victor never said anything to me about embezzlement. This is Elena's revenge for the divorce. She's fabricating. I'm fabricating my father's will. Elena's voice remained calm, but steel ran underneath. I'm fabricating documents he had prepared 2 months before his death. Before you served me with divorce papers, before he even knew you planned to abandon his pregnant daughter. She nodded to James, who pulled out a thick file and began distributing copies to the board members. Over the past 3 years, Elena said, her voice growing stronger with each word, Marcus Thorne has stolen approximately $4 million from Rodriguez Global through fraudulent expense reports, kickback arrangements with vendors, and shell companies designed to funnel money away from this corporation. This is absurd, Marcus turned to the board members. You all know me. I've worked here for 8 years. I've been instrumental in our expansion. You've been instrumental in your own enrichment, Elena corrected. Page 3 shows the shell company in Delaware. Page 7 documents the vendor kickbacks. Page 12 has expense reports for business trips that never happened. Private getaways with your mistress charged to Rodriguez Global. Natasha's face went pale. Several board members were already reading through the documents, their expressions darkening. Natasha Bennett, Elena continued, finally looking directly at the other woman, has been complicit in this fraud. She's approved expenses she knew were fraudulent, attended trips funded by stolen money, and actively participated in the affair that violated multiple company policies. I'm pregnant with Marcus's child, Natasha said desperately. We fell in love. That's not a crime. No, but embezzlement is. Elena's smile was sharp. And Natasha, I'm going to need you to provide medical documentation of your pregnancy. Today, because I find it interesting that you're claiming to be 4 months along but have no visible signs, haven't mentioned any morning sickness, and according to your Instagram posts from last week, you were drinking champagne at a club opening. Natasha's hand flew away from her stomach, as if burned. I wasn't actually drinking it. I was just holding. Stop. Marcus's voice was hollow. He was staring at the documents in front of the board members, watching them read page after page of evidence he'd assumed no one would ever find. Just stop, Natasha. So she's not pregnant, Carlos said slowly, piecing it together. Marcus left his actual pregnant wife for a woman faking a pregnancy. And while doing so, he was stealing from this company. He looked at Elena with new respect. Your father knew all of this. My father knew everything. Elena reached the head of the table, standing directly beside the chair where Carlos sat. He investigated, documented, and prepared this evidence specifically to protect me and his granddaughter from a man he knew would eventually show his true nature. Elena. Marcus's voice had lost all its confidence, replaced by something approaching desperation. We can work this out. The divorce, the company issues, all of it. I made mistakes, but we have a daughter coming. We need to nothing. Elena placed both hands on the back of her father's chair. Carlos, I'm going to need you to move. Carlos stood immediately, understanding the symbolism. This was her chair now. Her company. Her empire. Elena sat slowly, carefully, adjusting her position to accommodate her pregnant belly. From this vantage point, she could see everyone, the board members with their damning evidence, Marcus with his shattered confidence, Natasha shrinking in a chair she'd never belonged in, James watching with quiet pride. Let me be very clear about what's going to happen, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of 5 generations of Rodriguez leadership. Marcus Thorne, you are terminated from Rodriguez Global effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building as soon as we're finished here. You'll be allowed to collect only personal items from your office under supervision. You can't fire me without board approval, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. I have 100% voting control. But if you'd like to put it to a vote. Elena looked around the table at the board members, all of whom were still reading through evidence of Marcus's theft. All in favor of Marcus Thorne's immediate termination for cause, including forfeiture of all severance and benefits. Every hand went up. Even Carlos raised his hand, recognizing that Elena had outmaneuvered them all. Natasha Bennett, you're also terminated effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be delivered within 7 business days, as California law requires. But you're not to set foot on Rodriguez Global property again. Natasha opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say? That she deserved to stay after sleeping with a married executive and helping him steal from the company. Furthermore, Elena continued, I'm referring the evidence of Marcus's embezzlement to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. The company will cooperate fully with any investigation and will pursue civil recovery of all stolen funds plus punitive damages. Elena, please, Marcus's voice broke. Think about our daughter. You're going to send her father to prison? I'm thinking about my daughter constantly. Elena replied, I'm thinking about what kind of world she deserves to grow up in. One where actions have consequences. Where theft is punished. Where men who betray their pregnant wives don't get to play the victim. She leaned forward, her green eyes hard as jade. You served me with divorce papers at my father's funeral, Marcus. You called me fat and boring and said my greatest accomplishment was producing a baby. You threw away our marriage because you thought I was powerless. Because you assumed my father would leave everything to Carlos. Because you believed I had nothing to offer without my family's name behind me. I was wrong, Marcus whispered. God, Elena, I was so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't erase your theft, or your betrayal, or the fact that you were planning your next wedding while I was planning our daughter's nursery. Elena stood again, her hand protective over her belly. You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences. She turned to the board members. Gentlemen, I know this is a shock. I know you have questions about my qualifications, my ability to lead while preparing for motherhood, my plans for the company's future. I'm scheduling individual meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks. I want to hear your concerns, understand your perspectives, and share my vision for where Rodriguez Global is heading. Thomas Warren, the oldest board member and her father's closest friend, spoke up. Elena, your father spoke to me about his decision to name you CEO. He said you were the best strategic mind he'd ever seen. That you understood not just logistics but people. He said when the time came, you'd be ready. He paused. Are you ready? Elena looked around the room at Marcus being a broken man, at Natasha crying silently, at Carlos still processing his own diminished inheritance, at the board members waiting to see if she could truly fill her father's massive shoes. I've been ready my entire life, she said simply. I just needed to remember it. James cleared his throat. There are additional provisions in the will regarding the family estate, investment portfolios, and other assets. I propose we adjourn this meeting and schedule individual sessions to review. One more thing. Elena interrupted. Marcus, I'm formally rejecting your divorce petition. California allows a responding party to file a counterpetition, which I'll be doing within the week. You'll find that divorcing the CEO and sole owner of your former employer puts you in a rather difficult negotiating position. Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, you have no job, no income, and shortly you'll be facing criminal charges. Meanwhile, I have unlimited legal resources and a very strong case for fraud. In the inducement you married me under false pretenses, conducted an affair throughout our marriage, and committed crimes that directly impacted my family's company. Elena's smile was cold. You wanted a divorce, Marcus. You'll get one. But it's going to be on my terms, not yours. She nodded to James. Please have security escort Mr. Thorne and Miss Bennett from the building. And contact the district attorney's office. I want to file charges by end of business today. 2 security guards entered the room as if James had summoned them telepathically. Probably he had texted them during the chaos, always 3 steps ahead. Ma'am, one of them said to Elena, acknowledging her authority. We'll make sure they leave the premises immediately. Marcus stood slowly, his legs seeming barely able to support him. He looked at Elena one last time, his face a mask of devastation and regret. I loved you once. I really did. No, Elena said quietly. You loved what I represented. There's a difference. She watched them leave Marcus with his head down, Natasha clutching her purse and crying. Both of them escorted by security like criminals, because that's what they were. The conference room doors closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like finality. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Elena returned to her father's chair and sat down, feeling the weight of it, the history of it, the responsibility of it. Her daughter kicked hard against her ribs, as if celebrating. Gentlemen, she said, looking at each board member in turn. My father built Rodriguez Global from nothing. He taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about making decisions that protect your people, growing your business strategically, and never forgetting that every number on a balance sheet represents real lives, real families, real futures. She placed both hands on the table, her wedding ring soon to be removed catching the light. I stepped away from this company for 6 months to protect my daughter's health. Some of you probably saw that as weakness. Marcus certainly did. But I'm back now, and I want you to understand something. Being a mother doesn't make me less capable of running this company. If anything, it makes me more focused. Because every decision I make now, I make knowing my daughter will inherit the world I create. Thomas Warren smiled. Victor would be very proud of you, Elena. I hope so. Elena felt tears threaten but blinked them back. Now, let's talk about Q4 projections. I've been gone for 6 months, but I've been reading every report, every analysis, every strategic memo. And I have concerns about our expansion into the Asian market that I'd like to discuss. For the next 2 hours, Elena led her first board meeting as CEO. She questioned assumptions, challenged projections, approved some initiatives, and tabled others. She spoke with authority about market conditions, regulatory environments, and competitive pressures. She reminded every person in that room that she'd been strategic planning director for 3 years before her pregnancy, that she understood this business down to its molecular level. By the time the meeting adjourned, even Carlos, who'd clearly hoped to inherit the empire himself, was nodding along with her analysis. As people filed out, Thomas Warren lingered. Elena, can I give you some advice? Of course. The hard part isn't over. Firing Marcus was necessary, but it's going to create problems. He has allies in this company, people who'll question your judgment, and publicly prosecuting him. That's going to get ugly. I know. Elena stood carefully, her back aching from 2 hours in her father's chair. But if I let him walk away without consequences, what message does that send? That the CEO's ex-husband gets special treatment? That theft is acceptable if you're sleeping with the right person? No, Thomas agreed. You're right, justice matters. I just want you to be prepared for the fight. I've been preparing for this fight my entire life, Elena said. I just didn't know it until yesterday. After Thomas left, only James remained. He was packing up documents, his expression satisfied. You did well, he said simply. My father prepared me perfectly. Elena walked to the window, looking out over downtown Los Angeles. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was processing what just happened. Somewhere, Natasha was probably calling lawyers. Somewhere, people were already spreading gossip about the dramatic will reading and the CEO's pregnant daughter who'd inherited everything. Let them talk. What happens now? Elena asked. Now, we prepare for war. James replied. Marcus will fight the criminal charges. He'll try to contest the will, though he has no standing. He'll make the divorce as difficult and public as possible, trying to paint you as vindictive and unstable. And the media will have a field day, with this story: pregnant CEO fires, cheating husband, family dynasty drama, embezzlement scandal. It's going to be intense. Good. Elena turned from the window, her hand on her belly. I want it intense. I want everyone watching when I prove that underestimating me was the biggest mistake of Marcus Thorne's life. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your inheritance. Enjoy it while it lasts. You'll never be able to handle the pressure. M. Elena screenshot it and forwarded it to James. Add this to the harassment file. Another text came through, this time from a number she recognized. Rebecca Chen, her best friend from Stanford who'd moved to New York for investment banking. Oh my God. The news is already breaking. You inherited everything? And fired Marcus? I'm flying out tomorrow. We need to celebrate, strategize, plan his complete destruction. Elena smiled, typing back. Come stay at the Montecito estate. I need someone who remembers who I was before Marcus made me forget. She looked around the conference room, the sight of her father's legacy being transferred, of Marcus's downfall, of her own resurrection. In 24 hours, she'd gone from a discarded pregnant wife to the CEO of a near billion-dollar empire. Her daughter kicked again, strong and insistent. Your grandfather was right, Elena whispered to her belly. We're going to build something extraordinary. And anyone who tries to stop us is going to learn what happens when you underestimate a Rodriguez woman. The war was just beginning. But Elena had every intention of winning. The news broke within 3 hours. Elena was in her father's office, her office now reviewing operations reports, when her assistant buzzed through. "Miss Rodriguez, there are 6 reporters in the lobby. They're asking for comments about the will reading and Mr. Thorne's termination." Elena closed her eyes briefly. She'd known this was coming, but she'd hoped for at least a day to prepare. Tell security to keep them in the lobby. No access to executive floors. And draft a brief statement. Rodriguez Global confirms a change in leadership following the passing of founder Victor Rodriguez. The company is committed to continuing its growth trajectory under new management. No further comments at this time. Yes, ma'am. Also, your Uncle Carlos is asking to meet with you. He says it's urgent. Of course, he was. Elena glanced at the clock, 2:47 p.m. The will reading had ended at noon. Carlos had probably spent the past 3 hours calculating his next move. Tell him I can meet at 4 o'clock. 30 minutes, no more. Elena needed to establish boundaries immediately. Carlos might be her uncle, but he'd just lost the empire he'd assumed was his. That made him either a valuable ally or a dangerous enemy, and she needed to figure out which. Her phone rang. James Patterson. "Have you seen the headlines?" he asked without preamble. "I've been avoiding my phone." "Don't avoid it much longer. TMZ has the story. So does the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, and about 40 business blogs." James sounded almost amused. "You're trending on Twitter. Number, pregnant CEO, is apparently a thing now." Elena pulled up her laptop and searched her name. The results made her stomach clench. Rodriguez dynasty drama. Pregnant daughter inherits $800M empire. Fires cheating husband. CEO's daughter takes control. Elena Rodriguez, named head of family business amid divorce scandal. From housewife to headquarters, how one pregnant woman became a tech logistics titan overnight. And worse, from gossip sites, pregnant and powerful. Elena Rodriguez kicks cheating hubby to the curb, takes his job. Baby bump revenge. Billionaire heiress destroys ex's career. The articles were accompanied by photos, her at the funeral, visibly pregnant and grief-stricken. Marcus looking confident and polished at industry events. Natasha in designer clothes at company functions, always positioned just slightly too close to Marcus. "This is going to get uglier," James warned. Marcus's attorney just filed a motion contesting his termination. They're claiming wrongful dismissal, emotional distress, and this is interesting. They're arguing that you're not mentally competent to make executive decisions due to pregnancy hormones and grief. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "He's claiming I'm incompetent because I'm pregnant?" His exact words in the filing are emotionally unstable due to the combined effects of late-stage pregnancy, recent bereavement, and the stress of unexpected responsibility. He's positioning himself as the victim of a vindictive, irrational woman. That's his strategy? To argue that pregnant women can't run companies. It's a risky strategy, but he's desperate. James paused. "Elena, this is going to play out very publicly. Every decision you make in the next few weeks will be scrutinized. The board will be watching to see if you can handle the pressure. Investors will be nervous about leadership stability, and Marcus will use every misstep to argue that he was right about your competence." Elena stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Los Angeles. Her father had stood in this exact spot thousands of times, looking out over the city he'd conquered through intelligence and determination. "Then I won't make any missteps," she said quietly. "You're 8 months pregnant, grieving your father, and running a near-billion-dollar company. Missteps are inevitable. The key is how you recover from them." After hanging up, Elena allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to feel overwhelmed. 3 minutes to acknowledge that her back ached, her ankles were swollen, her daughter was kicking her ribs relentlessly, and she'd barely slept in 48 hours. 3 minutes to wonder if Marcus was right, if she was taking on too much, if she should have just accepted a trust fund and walked away. Then the 3 minutes ended, and Elena Rodriguez, CEO, not victim, got back to work. Marcus Thorne sat in his attorney's office, a glass of whiskey in his hand despite it being only 3 in the afternoon. Gerald Morrison, one of Los Angeles's most aggressive family law attorneys, reviewed documents with the kind of predatory focus that came with a $850 per hour retainer. The wrongful termination suit is solid, Gerald said. You were fired without proper cause, without following the employee handbook's progressive discipline procedures, and in a manner clearly designed to humiliate you publicly. We can argue emotional distress, reputational damage, and future loss of earnings. What about the embezzlement accusations? Marcus's voice was hoarse. He hadn't slept since leaving Rodriguez Global in handcuffs, metaphorically, though the security escort had felt close enough to an arrest. Gerald's expression sobered. That's more complicated. The evidence they have is substantial. Shell companies, falsified expense reports, bank records showing wire transfers. If the DA files charges, if Elena has to formally request prosecution, she can also choose to handle it as a civil matter, sue you for return of funds plus damages, but not pursue criminal charges. Gerald leaned back in his leather chair. That's your negotiating point. You offer to settle the divorce quickly and favorably if she agrees not to file criminal charges. Marcus laughed bitterly. You didn't see her face. She's not interested in favorable settlements. She wants blood. Everyone wants blood until they realize the cost. Criminal prosecution means months of publicity, a trial, testimony from Elena while she's a new mother. It means her company's financial records being subpoenaed and examined. It means media coverage of every sordid detail of your affair. Gerald tapped his pen against his desk. No CEO wants that kind of distraction, especially a brand new CEO trying to establish credibility. So we threaten to make it as ugly and public as possible. Exactly. You demand a jury trial. You subpoena every executive at Rodriguez Global to testify about Elena's work history, her emotional state, her relationship with her father. You make discovery so extensive and invasive that settling becomes more attractive than fighting. Marcus thought about Elena in that conference room, sitting in her father's chair, firing him with the cold precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. She hadn't looked unstable or emotional. She'd looked powerful. What about the pregnancy angle, he asked. Can we use that? Gerald's expression became calculating. California law prohibits discrimination based on pregnancy. But, and this is the key, if we can establish that Elena's decision-making is impaired by her condition, that opens different avenues. We're not arguing she can't work because she's pregnant. We're arguing that the specific combination of late-stage pregnancy, grief, and sudden responsibility has created a temporary incapacity. Will that work? It's controversial, and it'll make you look like an asshole. But it might create enough doubt about her decisions to strengthen your wrongful termination case. Gerald pulled up a document on his computer. We'll need expert testimony, psychiatrists willing to testify about pregnancy hormones affecting judgment, occupational psychologists discussing grief's impact on decision-making capacity. Marcus drained his whiskey. Do whatever it takes. Elena thinks she's destroyed me. I want her to understand that she's declared war on someone who knows all her weaknesses. His phone buzzed. Natasha. He'd been ignoring her calls all day, but finally answered. Marcus? Oh God, Marcus, I just got served. Natasha's voice was panicked, high-pitched. Elena's suing me for fraud, conspiracy, and she wants medical records proving I was pregnant. She subpoenaed my gynecologist, Marcus. She knows I lied. Marcus closed his eyes. Of course Elena knew. She'd always been smarter than he gave her credit for. When did you get served? An hour ago. At my apartment. There were photographers waiting outside. Someone tipped off the press that I was faking the pregnancy. Natasha was crying now, ugly sobs that grated on Marcus's nerves. What do I do? Get your own attorney. I can't be associated with your legal problems right now. But you said we were in this together. You said. That was before I knew you were lying about being pregnant, Natasha. Marcus's voice went cold. Did you really think you could fake something like that? That no one would figure it out? You believed me. For months, you believed me. Because I wanted to believe you. Because it gave me a reason to leave Elena that didn't make me look like a complete bastard. Marcus stood and walked to the window of Gerald's office. But now Elena has proof you lied, which means my entire basis for the divorce, that I was leaving to be with the woman carrying my child, is exposed as fraud. I did it for us, Natasha whispered. I wanted you so badly, and I knew you wouldn't leave Elena unless you had a good enough reason. The pregnancy was supposed to be that reason. Well, congratulations, it worked, and now we're both fucked. He hung up as Natasha started crying again. Gerald raised an eyebrow. The mistress wasn't actually pregnant? Apparently not. Marcus sank back into his chair. How bad does that make things? For your divorce? Catastrophic. You left your pregnant wife for a woman faking a pregnancy. That's going to destroy any sympathy you might have gotten. Gerald drummed his fingers on his desk. But we can use it differently. We argue that Elena knew about Natasha's deception, that she used your affair as a weapon to take control of the company. We paint her as calculating and manipulative rather than a wronged woman. Will anyone believe that? Probably not. But we only need to create doubt. We need the board to question whether Elena fired you for legitimate business reasons or personal revenge. We need investors to worry that she's making decisions emotionally rather than strategically. Gerald pulled up more documents. Here's what we do. We leak stories to friendly journalists, nothing actionable, just anonymous sources questioning Elena's experience, her ability to handle the stress, whether her father's death impaired his judgment in updating the will. Marcus nodded slowly. Death by 1,000 cuts. Exactly. Elena might have won the first battle, but this is a long war. And she's 8 months pregnant, grieving and managing a company for the first time. Eventually, she'll crack. And when she does, we'll be there to document every mistake. Elena's 4 o'clock meeting with Carlos started poorly and went downhill from there. You humiliated me, Carlos said, not bothering with pleasantries as he entered her office. In front of the entire board, in front of people I've worked with for 20 years. I read my father's will, Elena replied calmly. I didn't write it. Victor was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. No rational person leaves their entire empire to a pregnant girl who hasn't worked in 6 months instead of their brother who's been with the company since the beginning. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. I have an MBA from Stanford and 3 years of executive experience. You have a law degree you never used and a position as VP of Legal Affairs that my father created to keep you employed. Let's not pretend this is about qualifications, Uncle Carlos. This is about you believing you deserve to inherit something you didn't build. Carlos's face flushed red. I helped Victor build this company. I was there for the first expansion, the first major contracts, You were there, Elena interrupted. You showed up and did what my father asked. But you didn't strategize. You didn't innovate. You didn't drive growth. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer. In the 3 years I was strategic planning director, Rodriguez Global's revenue increased by 118%. In the 20 years you've been VP of Legal Affairs, the legal department's budget has increased by 340%, while your department's efficiency metrics have declined by 22%. Carlos stared at the numbers. That's not a fair comparison. Why not? Because it makes you look bad? Elena stood, despite the effort it required. Uncle Carlos, I love you, your family. But this company isn't a legacy entitlement program. It's a business that employs 42,000 people, whose livelihoods depend on competent leadership. And you think you're competent? You're about to have a baby. How do you plan to run a billion-dollar company while breastfeeding and changing diapers? The question, almost identical to Marcus's arguments, made Elena want to scream. Instead, she kept her voice level. Women have been managing careers and families for decades. I'll have help nannies, assistants, family support, the same resources male CEOs use when they have children. Except no one questions whether they can handle both. Male CEOs aren't 8 months pregnant and grieving. No, but they face their own challenges, and somehow, the world trusts them to manage despite life's complications. Elena moved closer to her uncle, her voice softening. I understand you're hurt. I understand you expected to inherit this company. But my father made his choice, and it was the right one. I'm asking you to support that choice, to help me lead Rodriguez Global into its next chapter. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired. What do you want from me? I want you to stay as VP of Legal Affairs. I need your experience and your institutional knowledge. I need someone who remembers what this company was like before the massive growth, who understands the foundation my father built. Elena paused. But I need loyalty, Uncle Carlos. Not grudging acceptance, real loyalty. Can you give me that? And if I can't, then I'll accept your resignation and wish you well in your future endeavors. The $10 million my father left you is enough to retire comfortably. Carlos studied her face, seeming to see something there he hadn't noticed before. You really are Victor's daughter. You have his eyes when you make threats gentle but absolutely serious. Is that a yes? It's a yes. Carlos extended his hand. I'll support you, Elena. I might not like it, but I'll do it. For Victor's memory, if nothing else. They shook hands, and Elena felt one piece of her precarious new reality settle into place. Not perfect, not enthusiastic, but functional. After Carlos left, Elena's assistant buzzed through again. Miss Rodriguez, Rebecca Chen is here. She says she's an old friend and that you're expecting her. Elena smiled for the first time all day. Send her in immediately. Rebecca burst through the door, like a force of nature. 5'2" of pure determination in a Prada suit. Her dark hair in a severe bob, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Holy shit, Elena. Rebecca crossed the office in 4 strides and pulled Elena into a hug that was careful of her belly, but fierce in its affection. I got on the first flight out. What the actual fuck has been happening in your life? Elena felt tears threaten the first real emotion she'd allowed herself since the will reading. It's so good to see you. Sit down before you fall down. You look exhausted. Rebecca guided Elena to the sofa in the corner of the office, the same one where Elena's father used to take afternoon calls while reviewing contracts. Talk, tell me everything. And don't leave out any details because I've been reading the news coverage and it sounds like a goddamn soap opera. For the next hour, Elena talked about Marcus's affair, the divorce papers at the funeral, discovering her inheritance, the will reading, the embezzlement evidence, Natasha's fake pregnancy. Rebecca listened with the focused intensity she'd always brought to complex problems, occasionally making notes on her phone. Okay, Rebecca said when Elena finished. Here's my assessment. Marcus is going to wage a PR war because he can't win a legal one. He'll paint you as emotional, unstable, vindictive, every sexist trope about women in power. He'll question your competence, your judgment, your motives. James said the same thing. James is right. But here's what Marcus doesn't understand. You have something he doesn't. You have the truth. You have the moral high ground. And you have an $800 million platform to tell your story. Rebecca pulled up her phone. I've already drafted a media strategy. We control the narrative, Elena. Not through press releases and corporate speak, but through showing who you are. The woman who stepped away to protect her baby. The daughter who earned her father's trust. The leader who won't tolerate theft or betrayal. I don't want to be a public figure. I just want to run my company. Too late. You're already public. Better to shape that story than let Marcus shape it for you. Rebecca's smile was sharp. Besides, I happen to know several journalists who would kill for an exclusive interview with America's newest pregnant CEO. We give them access, controlled, strategic access, and suddenly you're not a gold digger who destroyed her husband's career. You're a brilliant executive stepping into her destiny. Elena leaned back against the sofa, feeling her daughter kick rhythmically against her ribs. The baby had been active all day, as if sensing her mother's stress. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. What if Marcus is right? What if I can't handle this? Then you'll figure it out. That's what leaders do. Rebecca squeezed her hand. Elena, I watched you win a case competition at Stanford while running a fever of 102. I watched you present a 20-year strategic plan to venture capitalists who tried to tear it apart, and you defended every projection until they wrote you a check. You've always had this in you. You just let Marcus convince you otherwise. He was very convincing. He was very invested in keeping you small. Because if you remembered who you really were, he'd have no power over you. Rebecca stood and pulled Elena up with her. Now come on. I'm taking you home. You need to rest, eat something other than stress and adrenaline, and let me meet this fabulous Montecito estate I've heard about. I should stay and work. There are operations reports to review, strategic plans to update. Elena, you're 8 months pregnant. You just buried your father, inherited a fortune, and destroyed your ex-husband's career. You're allowed to go home. Rebecca's voice softened. Your father would want you to take care of yourself and the baby. The company can survive one night without you. Elena knew she was right. Her body was already screaming at her back pain, swollen ankles, exhaustion that went bone deep. She was running on adrenaline and determination, but both were finite resources. Okay, she agreed. But I'm bringing the operations reports with me. Of course you are. Rebecca linked her arm through Elena's. Come on, Mama Bear. Let's get you horizontal before you fall over. As they left the office, Elena's phone buzzed, another unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened the message. Enjoy your moment, Elena. But you can't run a company from a hospital bed. And that's exactly where you're headed if you keep pushing yourself. You're not strong enough for this. Elena stared at the words, feeling anger rise like bile in her throat. Marcus was threatening her health now, suggesting that stress might harm her or the baby. What is it? Rebecca asked, noticing her expression. Marcus being Marcus. Elena forwarded the text to James with a note to add it to the harassment file. Then she blocked the number. But as they walked to the parking garage, Elena couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in her chest. Marcus knew her weaknesses. He knew she was vulnerable right now physically, emotionally, professionally, and he was going to exploit every single one of them. The war wasn't just beginning. It was already here. And Elena was fighting it while 8 months pregnant, grieving, and learning to lead an empire she'd inherited from a father who believed in her more than she believed in herself. Her daughter kicked hard, as if reminding her mother why none of this mattered except survival. Elena placed both hands on her belly and made a silent promise. I will protect you, no matter what it costs me. No matter who I have to become. You will grow up safe and loved and strong. Marcus Thorne had declared war on the wrong woman. And soon, very soon, he would learn exactly how expensive that mistake would be.